Okay, so welcome everybody. Today we are talking about, are you a trauma-informed leader? My name is Brenda Rigney. I'm a business and leadership coach. I identify as she and her. I am grateful to live and work and play on the unceded coastal Salish territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. And I'm a colonial settler from Ukrainian, Scottish, and Irish heritage. So I'd like to also welcome Colleen Nelson. Colleen, want to share a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Colleen Nelson. I'm a licensed professional counselor here in the state of Colorado. I am getting used to this new introduction. I'll be honest, I was talking with Brenda the other day. I am also going to use her format just because this is literally the first time I've ever introduced myself in this way. But I am also grateful to live, work, and play on the unceded territory of actually many North American indigenous tribes. I actually live on the territory that is considered to be a gathering place for many different tribes. I looked into it, and it's not actually a specific territory. So I'll name a few of those: Arapaho, Ute, Cheyenne, but it's quite a new experience to introduce myself this way. So forgive me as I fumble through it. I also identify as she and her, and I am a trauma-informed leader because I've got a variety of certifications in a trauma background. I'm certified in EMDR. I also am certified in somatic experiencing. We'll get into what those two are here in just a moment. And I'm grateful to be here and to talk about this topic and continue to dive into all of this today.
Amazing. So why are we talking about being a trauma-informed leader? Well, I'm just going to share my personal experience, and then I'm going to turn it over to Colleen. I discovered, actually, Colleen, I don't know, like, when was it, Colleen, that I probably connected with you? Probably late last year sometime. You are a mutual connection of another coach that we know, and she had taken over this other coach's Instagram for a day, which was phenomenal. And she started talking about things like boundary shield and big T trauma and little T trauma and like all these words. And I was like, whoa. And not that I was completely unaware or uninformed, but I think hearing it in a very comprehensive manner and something that I felt was constructive, that I could actually formulate like a framework around, it became a usable tool. And when we talk about mental wellness and mental wellness in the workplace and leading and managing and coaching people, it made sense to me. It came into my world of like, as far as business and leading and coaching people. And I could actually see, for lack of a better way of saying it, a practical application to me being a leader and stepping into that leader with my people that I coach, clients, past employees, etc. So that's where I sort of like got connected to Colleen. She came on and did a 3 Uniques podcast with me, which I host weekly. And then I actually just participated in her trauma-informed leadership coaching certification over the month of May, and still going on. We're still in practice around it. So I wanted to ask Colleen to come on today and share her learnings and us to engage, I think, as leaders in business to talk about it, to make it an accessible topic, a topic that can be woven into business strategy, can be woven into our daily practice of working in our offices, our workplaces, wherever that may look like. And that it doesn't have to be this taboo topic that we like hide away, that we go run off to HR and talk about and try and get into our benefits program. But like leaders, employees to employees, like it's just a topic that we go through. And knowing that it also can be a very sensitive topic and we want to protect people's boundaries on it, even in today's conversation. So that's one of the things that I'll ask everybody, just as sort of a grounding rule, so to speak, is that we protect the confidences of the people on the call, questions that may come up. We want to try and create this as an open form of discussion. And at the same time, just be sensitive to the fact or empathetic to the fact that this can also be an alarming topic for some folks, for all of us. So just being cognizant of that. Mm-hmm. So with that, Colleen, over to you.
Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Yeah, I guess it's like the big question. Are you a trauma-informed leader? Like, what does that mean?
Well, first of all, I want to go back to what you just said a second ago, and I think that's actually a really great way to start off how we step into trauma-informed leadership. It really comes down to the basis of understanding consent in a completely different way, and also understanding what happens when we talk about these topics and what happens when we don't. Right. And I think we all get into this arena as leaders, especially in the business world, where we don't want to trigger anybody. We don't want to push any buttons. We don't want to create conflict. We don't want to ruffle feathers too often. And especially when it comes to the topic of trauma. And when we're talking today, of course, we're initially saying to all of you, hey, this is a triggering topic. This is something you've signed up for, but also please feel free to always have permission to mute, to walk away, to go take a moment to take a deep breath, to watch this recording later. You have permission, not only from me, but I want you to give yourself permission to do that as well, because this topic is going to affect your nervous system. It's not may it will. It will. And that's okay. That's part of talking about these sorts of things. But we do need to take care of our bodies and ourselves as we enter into these discussions. And I'm going to talk about that here in a moment, and really what becoming trauma-informed means and what that looks like in leadership. A lot of it has to do with recognizing what's happening in our body, and also being aware of what's happening in those around us, and what their nervous systems are doing as well, and how to be respectful and lead through those triggers that may come up.
Amazing.
Yes. So Brenda, would you like me to kind of get into just some of the conversation about it? I want to make sure, I know you have some questions for me, or like to talk, have some dialogue around it as well, but I can just jump in, or I can answer if you have a particular question you'd like me to start with. Totally up to you.
I think it would be good to kind of get some grounding on like the theory, right? So like, what is trauma? And when I mentioned earlier about big T trauma, little t trauma, I think it'd be good to just sort of get aligned on some of the facts, like the terminology, so that we can, because I think being trauma informed is also really knowing, and that was helpful for me, just getting grounded in the terminology so I could speak, like a better way of saying it, like I don't want to fumble through a conversation with somebody. Like, yes, I want to approach it with care. And that's always, I think, the best advice to anybody is be authentic, be caring in these conversations, in these situations. But I think also to lead with like being trauma informed, you need to kind of have a little bit of a background into the terminology.
Yes, absolutely. And I do think, so let's start off with the difference between trauma informed, trauma trained, and then a trauma expert.
Okay.
So I think that's and then we'll get into what trauma is and kind of the components that lead up into trauma-informed care. All right, so trauma-informed means that you have education, knowledge, as well as a level of training where you are aware of what trauma is and how it can affect your particular field of expertise, right? So I usually like to say that it's specific. I'm not necessarily going to be trauma informed in the same way a firefighter is going to be trauma informed as a therapist. So it can be a little bit more specific given your particular expertise and tailored to what you see and what you live and work with every day. Trauma trained is going to be a little more of a hands-on experience. This is where you're also going to be doing your own personal work around your trauma story and the pieces that may come up, because this is where transference can happen a lot, where I'm working with someone who is dealing with trauma and then mine gets activated. This also happens in trauma-informed care, but this is where our boundaries come in. We'll get into that later. Trauma trained, you're actually going to be working with people through their trauma. So your own training also has to be mutual. A trauma expert is somebody who I would consider has the capacity, the training, and potentially the license to supervise and train others in trauma training. So this is someone who is trauma-informed, also trauma-trained, and then has some sort of licensing board or level of certification that they are going to be held accountable to. So I think that's important, because when we get into this, a lot of people say, well, I feel comfortable in this arena, but I don't necessarily want to do this. This is reserved for therapy or counseling, or, this is for the HR department, or this is for this department. Trauma-informed care is really about understanding what trauma is and having that knowledge, accountability, and leadership to walk into the realm of trauma-informed care and be able to, what's the word I want to use? Feel, maybe I want to say aligned, but it's so overused, but I'm going to use it anyways. Be aligned, with your own integrity and your own truth around what trauma is and how you want to have an interaction or a dialogue with a group or an individual. So what is trauma? So I would say a lot of different professionals have different definitions for this. I keep it incredibly simple. Trauma is a perceived threat to your survival by your body. It's your body responding to a perceived threat to your survival where there is no tangible solution.
Okay.
So this is a definition based on what our nervous system and our brain is doing when we're receiving data and sensory information with a traumatic event. So big T trauma is what we would consider to be the trauma that we all know about, that we would consider to be trauma, right? So that's violence, war, abuse, things that are physical in nature that physically threaten our body, right? There's a lot of expanding into the big T trauma around some emotional and psychological abuse, which I'm actually very encouraging of. Both big T and little T trauma, by the way, can be equal in severity. Right. So let's not say big T is actually bigger. It's just what we would consider to be a bigger event for our nervous system. Little T trauma is what we typically see as complex or built up trauma over time, patterns of behavior, neglect. A little T trauma could be a breakup, feeling left out, witnessing, experiencing, and being part of a shame-based interaction. It's very psychological in nature, and it's not always tangible for our nervous system. So sometimes it's disruptive because there is no foreseeable solution, versus if a cheetah is, chasing me, I'm going to understand what my options are at that point. My body is going to go into that survival mode. Versus if I'm being left out of a group and I'm not always sure of what's going on, my body is going to kind of spin into a variety of different actions that I could take and eventually land me in what we call trauma land, where everything kind of gets shut down and overwhelmed because there's no foreseeable solution.
And question.
Yes.
So big T trauma, little T trauma, they can happen on different timelines in our lifespan. So like,
yes.
0 to 35-year-old, like something that could have happened to us at 5 or 7 or 12. Maybe now looking back on it at 35 might be like, yeah, that's maybe more of a little T trauma, like being left out of a baseball pick, something like that, right? Which at the time when we were 5 or 7 in the schoolyard, that could have been a big thing.
Yes.
And there could also be like, it could be, depending on the individual, a form of microaggression. It could be those type of things. Looking back on it at 35, you might be like, well, it's okay that I wasn't picked for that little league, selection process. But back then it was big.
Yeah. And usually it's a pattern, right? That's what makes, if it's a one-time thing, we probably won't even register it, to be honest.
And if an adult explained even to us at the time, like one-time thing, and an adult came in when we were little and said, it wasn't a big deal, this is what happened, etc., then we'd probably move on from it.
If we feel like our emotions were validated and we were guided towards a solution that made our nervous system feel safe and a sense of belonging again, then it would not have been registered as a trauma. Right. The reason why a sense of belonging is traumatic is because we need to belong in order to survive primally, right? Our frontal cortex, so there's 2 parts of our brain I'll talk about a lot here, by the way, our frontal cortex and our hindbrain. I'm being very general here. Those are not necessarily diving into the brain biology today, but your frontal cortex or your higher consciousness can kind of perceive things in a bigger picture, but our hindbrain perceives things in a very survival-based way. So if we are left out of the baseball team, or if we're not picked to be part of a group, the question our hindbrain is there something wrong with me? Am I going to be left out of the group itself? Am I going to be able to survive? If you have an adult or another person come in and help mitigate those questions, then it's not always registered as a trauma. So there's a lot of context to this. And that's what makes this a little bit messy. And that's what also makes this complex. What I want all of you to hear me say, and this is the most important piece, is it doesn't really matter what it was. If your nervous system is giving you a direction that it's a trigger, it's a trigger. For whatever reason. And therapy and counseling can kind of help narrow down why and the what and the specifics. But what's most important about trauma-informed leadership is, hey, let's recognize when we're triggered. Let's recognize when our clients or our colleagues are triggered. And let's talk about how to bring ourselves or them back to safety in a consensual and trauma-informed way. Because I think we can get into the why a little bit too much ourselves, right? When we're shaming ourselves for feeling a certain way. And especially also in leadership, like, this isn't a big deal. Why are you so upset right now? You know, and so it's always big T trauma, single event, typically things that are big and loud and societally or culturally deemed as traumatic. Little t is usually a pattern of smaller things that lead up to what we call complex trauma or complex PTSD.
Okay. That was good. That was very informative. I know for some people we might be like, again, kind of swirling in it. So just know that you can also listen to this recording afterwards and get, you know, more into it, and just go back and replay exactly what Colleen said and hear it again for a second or a third time. Having gone through Colleen's training, like, you know, we had an opportunity to kind of dive deep into it and, you know, and go through scenarios, even in our own experience of where we've maybe potentially gone through some form of big T or little t trauma, just to understand the distinguishing factors of it and how we could be responding or reacting to it. And, you know, and also how to, like, you know, which we'll get into, I think, a little bit too, is like how to pull ourselves out of it. And like understand it, identify it, and even, you know, like you said, you know, it could be through therapy, it could be through counseling, but we can also be doing some self-care things daily to just recognize that we could be experiencing trauma today in the workplace. What do we need to do to ready ourselves or be prepared with our toolkit?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's kind of dive into what that looks like. I mean, this isn't a trauma-informed training. I'll say that out loud, right? I want to give you the information, but I also want you to understand that it should be overwhelming. It should be something that you kind of zone out to a little bit or get a little dissociated, which means, you know, you leave your body, because this training does take a little bit of time, and most importantly, what I call integration. Our nervous system can only handle so much information that is triggering content, or content that, new content, right? So when we take it in, we have two different parts of our brain evaluating the information being stated, right? So we've got our frontal cortex is like, I'm tracking, Colleen, I'm good. I don't know what you're talking about with overwhelmed. I hear you. And then we've got our hindbrain that's like, I'm floaty and a little disassociated and maybe have some tunnel vision right now. You know, and it's like, oh, that's me being overwhelmed with the information. So I'm actually going to have you all do this. And I know that you have your video off, but I'm going to have you do it anyways, because I find that when we just start talking about this, our nervous system says, hey, I know trauma. I know that feeling. Let's go there. Let's go to trauma land. I know it. It's a great place. And your nervous system does this because of empathy, right? Right? When we're talking about things, our brain's like, I know that feeling. Let me go there. So I want all of you to take a moment, and I'm going to do it with you so you can see it. And Brenda, you can do the same thing. Okay. If you're crossing your legs, if your legs are up, if they're not on the ground, I want you to put them on the ground. If you can or have the ability to, slip off your shoes or, you know, plant your feet firmly on the ground. What we're doing is we're going to ground. Okay, so anytime you feel floaty, dizzy, a little bit of tunnel vision, I actually want you to do this. And you'll practice the art of doing this while talking or, you know, while you're still in leadership, but this is something that I want you to feel the effect of. So plant your feet firmly on the ground, kind of maybe feel your back into the chair. I'm gonna have you close your eyes, and I'm gonna put my hand on my heart. I'm gonna put my hand on my belly. And you are welcome to put your hands flat on the top of your legs, or just on your chair, or on your chest and belly as well, whatever feels safe for you. And we're gonna take 5 deep breaths, y'all. Yep, you joined a mindfulness-based counseling training conversation, so here we go. Okay, and I'll count. So take 5 deep breaths. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. When you're ready, open your eyes. Come back on. Okay, so what I'm doing there is I'm telling my hindbrain, hey, I'm here, we're safe, we're good. Yes, we're talking about topics that might get you a little excited, but I need to be present and I need to be here in my body. That's a very simple one. Some of the other ways that we can ground is through scent. I've got essential oil by me at all times. So it's my little scent. So I put my little rollie on and smell it. Helps my nervous system come back. I've always got some sort of cup of something here, you know, so this is some coffee. And then I like to have some sort of tactile things, right? So I've got my chair here that's all fuzzy that I love to touch. So I really want you to utilize these. I know it seems so simple, but I'm telling you how profoundly impactful it is to stay in your body while you're leading is the most core component of trauma-informed care. If you leave your body, you're not going to feel when anybody in the room or any of your colleagues or clients are also triggered. Mm-hmm. Our nervous system is our greatest guiding factor in being able to stay with our clients, with our colleagues, and be able to do the work present in our body. I'm going to name it because it's important to name. Capitalism and the patriarchy and many other components of consumer-based content do not want us in our bodies. They want us out of our bodies because then we have less boundaries, we feel more impulsive, and we feel more inclined to purchase or make decisions that are based on marketing or sales, you know, coming at us, the content that's coming external from ourselves, we'll say. So we have to work extra hard in the world that we live in to come back to our bodies, especially with the screens that we're on as well. So the 3 components are going to be knowledge, accountability, and leadership. Trauma-informed leadership is about understanding what the nervous system is doing and what is actually happening. We're going to get into this a little bit today. Being able to be accountable. A lot of this has to do with secondary trauma and the pieces that can happen when you are in the process of witnessing, talking about, or receiving triggering content and what that feels like to be the leader in that situation. And then leadership. How we own our place in the world in a way that is trauma-informed, how we acknowledge racism and discrimination and prejudice as part of the conversation of trauma, mm-hmm. and how we recognize and continue to have the conversation around how we step in as trauma-informed leaders in those arenas. I am always a fan of fumbling your way through being accountable.
I'm sorry, I'm just on a Zoom call.
And
sorry, we'll just ask everyone to mute their line or just remember. Thank you.
Oh, very good.
That's okay. It happens.
Yes. So I'm always a fan of fumbling through anything, even if it's uncomfortable, right? As y'all saw me at the beginning of this. I told Brenda, I was like, I'm not even going to script it. I'm going to fumble through it because I want a role model for everybody what it looks like to be fumbly when it comes to these things. And race and culture is part of that, right? And stepping into those conversations. So Trauma-informed care is really about knowing your body and understanding the effect that the general world and your place in it has in your leadership role. Brenda, thoughts, questions? I'm going to pause here for a second. I've lost
Yeah, no, and also if anyone wants to put anything into the chat, we can definitely take a look at that too. First of all, I mean, I love the feet, like going back to some of the techniques to get yourself grounded back into your body. Just simply putting my feet on the floor before we even started doing the breathing, like, because right away my posture, like, you know, my shoulders go back, you know, when I'm putting my back against the back of the chair, and I've got like a stiff back chair here. It's not like a cozy couch, but it's like already, it's like my posture's going up. So my breathing, like this, just the airflow versus like when I'm hunched over on my computer like this, you know, everything is constricted. So that in itself. And then when you factor in the breathing, some essential oils, you know, it just takes it up a level. But I think it's really important to make sure that as leaders, that we have a menu of options. I like to say it like as far as our toolkit that can help get us grounded, even in a meeting, even in a conversation. We could be in with our supervisor, our manager, or we could be also in with our employees. And there's something that's coming up for us, and like, how do we just get grounded in that moment? Another technique that you've always shared with me too is like, you could even just call it out and say, whoa, that was like, you know, however you do it with that employee because you know them, or your client because you have that relationship. But in how I would say it is like, whoa, that was like a really big thing that we just unlocked there. We should just take a breath right now. Let's just take a little break from the conversation and let's just do some breathing and like work through it a bit physically, or even ask the question, how is it feeling, you know, in our body? But I think just calling it out sometimes too, in the sense of like, I felt that, did you feel that? We should, you know, maybe take a breath and just get regrounded again.
Absolutely. Well, and what I want to talk about today a little bit is how this looks in the business world. You know, I could deep dive into the counseling stuff all day, every day, y'all, but I don't think that's necessarily something we all signed up for. But I think that, oh, good. Don't be afraid to take a break and acknowledge why. This is key. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, McCarthy.
Very, very, very important to not avoid this conversation and to just acknowledge what's happening. I do it all the time, especially if I'm disassociating, because the second that I'm no longer my body, or I'm feeling floaty or tunnel vision, more than likely the other person feels the same. And we're not going to be able to be on the same page, nor say things that are going to be received in a way that's aligned with my own integrity and aligned with theirs. They might walk away from the conversation and have a completely different read on what was just said if they're not actually in their body and we're communicating with our minds and also our bodies. So let's talk about what this looks like in the business world, or really just, I think, any world where you are in a leadership role, but I'm going to talk about it specifically with coaching, business, and what it looks like outside of the counseling realm. So our response typically to trauma is, we have 4 different responses. We've got fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Okay. So flight, fight, freeze, and fawn, of course they're all F's, are the way that our nervous system, or our hindbrain, responds when it feels triggered. It feels that there is a threat to our survival. At this point, our brain has not determined that there is no solution. So please keep that in mind. And I'm going to explain why this is important here in a moment. Because if you can catch your clients, your colleagues, or yourself in fight, flight, fawn, or freeze, you might actually be able to address this trigger, like Brenda just named, hey, I felt this, before we get to trauma land, which is dissociative, numb, kind of shock place, where people get overwhelmed, burned out, and just shut down. We want to keep people engaged in this realm. So flight looks quite a lot like in the business realm. Somebody that is continually late to meetings, or doesn't show up on time, or is constantly leaving early, potentially signs up for a project and then last minute cancels, follows through with only half of the assignment, and then tends to procrastinate or take all the way up until like the very end point where they complete the project. So Flight, if they're triggered, can show up this way in business. And we don't always recognize that as, hey, they actually might be in a trauma trigger. And how do we talk about that, right? Like, how do we talk about what's going on? Change itself, challenge itself, risk can sometimes be interpreted by our nervous system as a potential threat to our survival, depending on what our past experience with risk and change is.
Yeah.
Well, so when we're asking our colleagues, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, and in business, we use those terms all the time. We're up against a challenge. We need to pivot. We need to, yes. We need to be more risk or less risk adverse or whatever those things are, right? So even the words that we use in strategy could also be triggering for us.
Yeah, and I definitely want to say, don't be afraid to use those terms, but use them and know that if you're getting a response that is one of these four, we've got to talk about it. We got to, and it's not, hey, what happened in your past? That it's definitely not that, but it's hey, I'm noticing this behavior and I want to figure out how to get you to a place where you feel safe to make this challenge, or you feel good about this next step, rather than looking at their behavior as necessarily a choice. I'm not saying that sometimes it's not a choice, okay, but it is important to recognize our nervous system will do things that is very contradictory to what our frontal cortex wants. This person might really want to show up on time. They might really want to complete that project. They might be really invested in the business, but their nervous system continues to shut them down over and over again, and they can't figure it out. Even just being able to name that for them is powerful, because then they can go do the work outside of the workplace and get the help they need so they can fully engage and be back in, and you can see all of their potential actually come to fruition.
Right.
Fight looks like someone who continually challenges, and not in a way that feels constructive. All right, because I'm all about constructive criticism. I'm all about people speaking up and being like, well, I feel this. This is about someone who fights just the general norms, like, hey, we're going to start at 9 a.m. tomorrow. And they're like, 9 a.m. just doesn't really work. I think we need to start at 8:30. We always need to start a half hour early. Just the things that don't really necessarily make sense to fight, but they feel like they need to make a statement about. Or their tone of voice is escalated and inappropriate when they are trying to give constructive feedback, and it comes across in a way that's disrespectful or unprofessional. Again, they might not be unprofessional and disrespectful people. They might be in a trauma response.
Right.
Freeze, of course, is somebody that might sign up for something and then just completely drop off the face of the earth. So this is kind of like a ghosting, as we call it. Or someone who starts a project and then fixates on just one aspect of the project, and they can't get off of it. They're just like, this is the part we need to figure out. We need to dig our heels in and really get this perfect. Perfectionism can sometimes come up in this freeze response. Fawn is a harder one to pick up on because we all kind of like it a little bit, but fawn is when the person is actually over-fixated on the leader. So instead of investing in the project, or instead of investing in their own work, they're investing in the leader themselves. They're crossing personal boundaries occasionally. They're constantly validating and rewarding your behavior, telling you how awesome you are as a leader, how much they love working with you, how inspired they are, but they're not following through on any of their work. Again, this might be their inability to believe in themselves as a trauma response. So they overfixate on the leader who they idealize, and they're trying to, get some sort of sense of safety through getting the leader to like them.
Right.
All four of these mean that their nervous system, their body, does not feel safe. That's important to understand. They don't feel safe. And that doesn't mean that you made them not feel safe. Let's be clear about that. But something about the content, something about the interaction, or something about the business itself, their nervous system is unable to establish a sense of safety in. If we can make every single one of our clients, our colleagues, our staff members, and our other leaders feel safe, the amount that we can accomplish in a fulfilling, integrity-based way is powerful. But it involves a lot of that, I'll say, whole care that we don't always put into business. So making our bodies safe by doing those grounding exercises, recognizing when we need to take a step away and take a breath, naming what's happening in a trauma-informed way, it deepens the work, and it also gets clients, colleagues, and professionals committed to you because they see that you're invested in more than just what they produce.
So good. I go back to like my first days. Like I started managing and leading people when I was 21 years old. I'm not going to say how old I am right now. Actually, I don't mind. I'm 52 here, 51 years old. My 52nd birthday is coming up this year. But, you know, I've been leading and managing people, coaching people for a long time. And if I had gotten this type of training, just this conversation with someone like yourself when I was 21, I just think about, you know, relationships, conversations, how different they would have gone. And even for myself, my own like sort of care as a leader, like what I was putting into myself, it would have been different. So it's good information to have now. Oh, did I freeze? Colleen, did you freeze? Oh, there you go. Hi.
Was I frozen or were you frozen?
I don't know. Maybe one of us was frozen or we're both frozen. I just said, did you hear what I said about like if I had gotten this information when I was 21?
Yes.
When I first started leading people. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Mel just informed us that you were frozen. So anyways, not that it was a competition. Anyways, it happens. I'd love to, Colleen, is it okay if we open up the channels for any questions that people have?
Absolutely.
Okay, and so why don't everyone that's on the call today, like if you have questions, just like load up the chat and let's start answering your questions. While you're doing that, I'm just gonna share with you a couple of things. So again, another reason why I brought Colleen on today is I have a 12-month coaching experience that's actually starting up in July, and Colleen is going to be one of the guest mentors. So I'll be coaching folks throughout the next 12 months, starting in July of 2021, all the way to June of 2022. I'm just like, wow, that seems so far away after everything that we've kind of gone through in the last year or so. But Colleen will be one of the guest mentors that's going to be coming in. I've got a few others like in emotional intelligence, relationship anxiety. I've got holistic wellness coaches. So I believe in the outer leader that like, you know, doing the business strategy, scaling organizations, but it's also to me about the inner leader. And the work that Colleen does and talking about being a trauma-informed leader is really that inner leader work. Like how can we really show up the best way possible for ourselves, for our families, and on also the people that we're serving every day. So overall, thank you to Colleen already for sharing that. So we've got, I think, a point here from Mel. I'd love to share some of this back to our people leaders. I've been taking notes, but wondering if you have further resources that I could add to my notes. This is really powerful. Yeah, so I think, well, one of the things I'm going to recommend is to follow Colleen on Instagram. She posts content daily from our own perspective as well as other people that she follows in the area of trauma-informed. And she has a lot of resources on there. And then Colleen, would you like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am doing trauma-informed leadership training twice a year. I was going to do 3 times a year, but I really want to give, we'll see if we do add a third one. But anyways, the second time is going to be in October. And so I'll be doing another trauma-informed leadership training starting in October. That is in the link on my website as well as on Instagram. I think that in the meantime, I talk about this all the time. It's something I hold master classes about. It's something that I do trainings and guest speaking events about consistently, as well as travel and talk about this in businesses in real life as well. Mm-hmm. So I'll be doing all of that, and I'm very interested in those type of things as well. And there's some books and podcasts I think that are really good to listen to. Most important book that I think if you're kind of wanting to dive in a little bit deeper into this realm of trauma, The Body Keeps the Score is absolutely fantastic. And I think is necessary reading for anybody that really wants to understand the world of trauma in an informed way.
Great. I just put that, I added that to the chat. So we've got a couple other questions here from Mallory. I'm curious how trauma-informed practice could inform or improve conflict resolution, and if you have any suggestions on integrating that into workplace conflict.
Absolutely. I think most of the time conflict happens because both parties are triggered by a previous trauma story, and it's just being replayed between the two. So I think getting into integrating that into the workplace conflict, you would want to really have them understand what's going on in my body. When did I initially feel triggered by whatever this person did? And how can I take ownership for me de-escalating my body and then being able to have a conversation where our nervous systems are not escalated? Because when our nervous system is escalated into fight or flight, we're not actually able to have a conversation about what just happened. We're having a conversation about all of the things that have happened that remind me of this conflict. So it's really about how do we de-escalate, how do we understand what our bodies are doing, and how we educate people in the workplace on how to do that for themselves, and leaders to help teach them how to de-escalate their nervous systems and then have a better engaged conversation around workplace conflict.
Okay, cool. Bakari asked a question here, which I think is great. When looking at the 4 F's that we just talked about in the workplace setting, how can we discern from trauma from apathy or something else? Because I think that's where leaders get like, it's like, is this a performance issue? And it could be, right? Like they could be, you know.
I'm going to be a little controversial here.
Okay.
I'll be honest with you. I think most of the time, if somebody is apathetic, it is because they're in trauma land. Mm-hmm. It is not a natural state of human existence to be apathetic.
Right.
Just like burnout, apathy, they're the same thing to me. We're talking about choice here. People cannot be in choice when they are triggered. I think the difference between when it is this trauma and when is this choice is, what is their nervous system doing? Where's their body? If they're actively present in their body and they're making a choice, more than likely the choice is either going to be, I don't want to do this project, or this is something that I'm incapable of doing. And they're just having a hard time getting the words out in an appropriate way.
Right.
But I personally think that it is 99.9.
Got a little frozen. We'll hear it. We'll hear the final countdown in a second. We'll just wait 2 more secs.
Some sort of a trauma response if somebody has made the choice.
Hi.
Okay.
All good.
I could hear you all the whole time. I was like, I couldn't hear you. Oh, so frustrating. Okay, so sorry.
Oh, too bad. We're like we still got 10 more minutes, so everyone just sort of stay on, and we'll get through. And Colleen will probably sign off again and then get back in. And I know we've got a couple more questions here. I'm just checking them out here so I see. Okay, I'm just gonna read some of the comments here. Well, Bakari, apathy equates to trauma, mic drop. Okay, I think, okay, so she's gonna log back out and then come back in. We'll get to some of these other questions before we sign off. And just so everyone knows too, while we're waiting for Colleen to get back in, so if you're interested in connecting with Colleen, if you go back into the Zoom link for today or the Eventbrite message for today, both my website and Colleen's website is there, and I'll follow up with an email message after the session today with the recording link to the session, plus more information about Colleen and I and like where to find us and learn more about our programs. And I would highly recommend her trauma-informed leadership coaching for anyone that's in leadership. If you're a coach, a consultant, and you're working with clients, if you're a leader in a business working with employees, customers, colleagues, I just, you know, like I said, if I had gotten this information when I was 21, when I was first learning how to lead and manage people, you know, things may have been differently in some of the relationships I know I've had with my team members. Okay. I'm going to go through some of the questions here. I don't want to answer on behalf of Colleen, but I think Darlene, I agree. I've read the Body Keeps Score. Okay, awesome. Chris, COVID affecting, any suggestions to engage in conversations with our teams? So Chris, let's wait, see if we get Colleen back on here. Sharon acknowledging the book. So that's awesome around Body Keeps Score. Alex, how to deal with an employee who shows a behavior of trauma that might be related to COVID-19 affecting people close to him or her. So remembering too, I think, folks, is that, you know, for leaders that are on the call that are working in organizations, if you're not familiar too with some of the programs that your organization offers, like in the way of benefits, they may have an EAP firm that they work with, so an employee assistance program. So that might also help some of your employees, because I think by no means am Colleen and I saying that we need to, hey, volume, we can't hear your volume. Just coming back on, it'll be good. But I think one of the things is no way are we saying that you need to solve for any traumatic situation. There are people, and so look into also the HR programs, the employee assistance programs that may be with your benefits provider that can also help out some of your employees. And to recommend, I think that's key, right? People are going through lots right now, family, personal issues, and it's hard to separate from the workplace. And like we can't. It's like one Brenda, I don't try and separate anything. I just keep it all together. So they may need some additional care and support. And so look into that. Talk to your HR professionals in your organization to see what's available. Okay, so this happens. We're just going to continue to go through. So important for these times, are you noticing different trends? My clients are certainly showing up with difficult situations that have been experienced. Absolutely. This is so valuable and timely. Grateful to you and Colleen. Thanks, Darlene. And thanks everyone for being on. I know that we didn't get to everyone's questions today. I know that you can see that Colleen's wrestling with trying to get back in here. So I appreciate her trying to do that. I think one of the things I'll do is I will offline with Colleen at the end of today's session with some of the questions that you have here in the chat, and we'll just put those in the email message back to you. So stay tuned for that. Also, just check your email, check your spam folder just in case it goes into there from a group email. But thanks everyone for tuning in today. Really appreciate you being a part of our session. And if you're interested in learning more about Colleen's workshops or the workshops that I provide for my clients, like my Aligned AF 12-month coaching experience, feel free to reach out to us. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Megan, Sharon, Vanita. Thanks for being on, Hannah, Kelly. It's awesome to have you here. Jen, thank you. Alex, Colleen, Brenda, Christina. Thanks, everyone. I'm glad that you were able to show up today. Have a great rest of your day. I hope this was informative for everyone. If you want, you can also unmute your line and say goodbye too. That's fine. Thanks, Marika. Take care, everyone.